I remember one time I met this Jewish lady, a survivor of the Holocaust. And I asked her, how do you get to stand up in front of people telling about your story, knowing that there are people in that audience who are deniers of the Holocaust? And she looked at me and said, Veraa, the cause is bigger than me. This story needs to be told for the future generations.
Hey guys, thanks for tuning in. So today we're going to continue on the theme of what it means to be a conscious and informed traveler in Namibia. As I mentioned yesterday, this must include taking a look at Namibia's history, which also includes the fact that it was the site of the first genocide of the 20th century. So in today's episode, we're going to take a look at this history and what the Nama and Herero people are doing currently to attain justice. And we'll look at this history through the eyes of Veraa Katuuo, through an interview I conducted with him recently. Now, Veraa was born in Namibia in 1954. He's a Herero man that lived through the apartheid system. At the time, Namibia was under South African administration, and like South Africa, it was under apartheid. In the 1970s, he moved to the United States, where he went to college and where he remains today, living in New York State. So ever since Veraa moved to the United States, he's been an advocate for all of the Herero and Nama people who are currently seeking justice from the German government for crimes that had been committed over 100 years ago. So over the next 2 days, we'll be looking at Veraa's story over a two-part interview. Today, Veraa will explain more about the Herero's history, the ties of the Herero and Nama genocide to that of the Holocaust, and the two paths in which the Herero and Nama people today are going down to attain justice. One, education, educating the world about what happened, and two, a legal path, which includes suing the German government for reparations. Tomorrow, we'll take a look at Veraa's personal story about what it was like being a Herero growing up in apartheid Namibia. One thing that really gives me pause for reflection when I think about my conversation with Veraa is the lengths that he has to go to share his story. He's told me that people sometimes don't believe that this genocide happened or that the events that occurred didn't actually constitute genocide. So he's constantly running up against opposition. And he's already dealing with a really difficult story to share, and to constantly run into opposition has got to be really challenging. And I have to say, I know what he's talking about to some degree. When I was in Namibia a few years ago covering this story, I had taken photographs of a graveyard. Now, this graveyard was a site of unmarked graves where thousands of Herero victims had been buried so many years ago during the genocide. And the graveyard exists today unmarked, and it sits at the edge of an affluent neighborhood in a region called Swakopmund. So I had taken photographs of this, and I received some letters from local members of the Namibian community in Swakopmund who told me that these images were photoshopped, that the genocide never happened, and the photos were definitely not photoshopped, and I was there to actually see these graves, so to say that they didn't exist was clearly a lie. And I received letters from someone who tried to also tell me that the Holocaust didn't happen. And as someone who has a Jewish father, that really hurt. I can't imagine how many other people may have misconceptions about the history of not only the Jewish Holocaust, but the Herero and Nama genocide. So one thing that Veraa told me that gives him strength was a conversation that he had with a Holocaust survivor at an event where she was describing what had happened during the Holocaust. And Veraa realized that there were some people in the audience that didn't believe her stories. And he went up to her and he said, how do you do this? How do you share your story knowing that some people won't believe you? And she said, this story is bigger than me. It has to be told. And so I think that is a really important statement. There are things that we confront in life that are unfair, that are flat out wrong, that are completely unjust. But when we realize that our fight for justice isn't just about us, it's bigger than us, I think that can give us strength. And that's definitely true for Veraa in his fight for justice for the Ovaherero and Nama people. And now I'm going to cut to the interview with Veraa Katuuo. All right, today I am on with Veraa Katuuo, who is the head of the Association of the Ovaherero Genocide in the USA. We're here to talk about his role in sharing the history of the Ovaherero people globally and his fight for justice against the German government for crimes that had been committed over 100 years ago. Veraa, thank you very much for joining today. How are you?
Yeah, it's a very thing. First of all, I have to say, believe me, the role we have been playing to advance our cause around the world is very, very, very important. And we are very thankful for that. Without people like you in the Berlin Colonial Christian Cup, our cause wouldn't be known around the world as it now. And we are really grateful for that. When I was in Namibia, when I was growing up in Namibia, we didn't know anything about the genocide, the word genocide. The only thing we knew that was a war between the Namas and against the Germans. And that led to the Ovaherero people to fled out of Namibia to end up in Botswana and South Africa. And I really didn't know that was a genocide until I came to the US in 1979 and starting to get exposed to books and to the Holocaust. And that's why really I got the inspiration that really we have to tell this story. We have to tell our story. If the Jewish are able to tell their story, and why can't we do that?
For those of you who don't know, you grew up in Namibia. You're Herero, born in Namibia, born and raised. And so you went through the essentially apartheid, right? Namibia at the time.
Yes.
When you lived there was under South African administration. So you're saying that during the time growing up there, you did not know that your people had been subjected to a genocide in the early 20th century?
Nope, we did not. The only thing we learned about this war just based on oral history, which means the war between the Ovaheros and the Germans. That's the only thing we knew. We never knew the word genocide. And when I came to this country, I came with a high school education. And that's the first time I heard about the genocide. The word genocide was in the US. And since I was more living in Brooklyn, which is more dominated by the Jewish people, and get to contact with people who are organizing the Holocaust event. And that's what I learned about the Holocaust and then about the genocide. And then I started read about the history and the connection between the Jewish and Ovaherero people being a victim of the Jewish atrocities. And that's why I get the inspiration to say, why can I start something where I can educate the people about the Ovaherero Genocide? And and then it didn't happen until when I came back from a conference in Bremen in Germany. I think it was 2005, where I contacted Gandhi and a few of my friends to talk about forming a non-profit organization that's going to educate the people about our genocide. And that's how the whole thing started. And that went on, and then that led to the court case. Although we was planning to hold German government accountable, but we never planning to file any case against the German government.
So you never initially set out to, your goal was never to create a nonprofit and sue the German government. These efforts grew out organically out of your understanding that your history was not well known throughout the world, and also not well known even within your own community. I mean, it took you moving to the United States.
Yes, that's true. And the most important thing, I remember the first time when we went to Germany we have like a conference in Germany, me and my wife in Berlin. And we did a presentation about the whole genocide in Namibia by the Germans. And based on the questions we got from the people, we realized that people didn't know anything about German colonial history. They didn't even know that Namibia was part of the German colonies. They didn't even know that Germany have colonies. We realized that we have a work to do here. And in order for us to convince, or even the government to demand apology from the government, we have to educate the German people themselves.
It seems that it's a sort of grassroots movement in terms of educating the German community and the global community as to the atrocities that had been committed in Namibia during the early 20th century. And also there is a legal effort that's now being spearheaded by you and a couple of others to take the German government to court in the United States to sue them for reparations.
What we're demanding from the German government is very simple steps. Step one is to ask for demanding for apology. Germany as a Christian nation have to realize what they did during the colonial period against the Nama and Ovaherero people was wrong. And they have to ask for sincere apology. And this apology can't just come from one minister or the other. It had to be in a concerted effort by the government itself. But somehow the government itself can come, to say that or kind of stipulate that, because somehow they're afraid if they recognize that, they kind of open themselves to lawsuits. But the fact is that was a genocide. And the only thing is just you have to come forward and just apologize for it and just find a way how we're going to, to address the wrongs.
For those who don't know, there was actually a letter by Lothar von Trotha, who was the German commander at the time, that explicitly stated that the Herero must be annihilated.
The Hereros and the Nama people must be, that was an extermination order. And this extermination order was just only written by von Trotha himself. This was approved at the highest level of the German government in Berlin. And that's the most kind of disturbing situation here. This is written. It's not like a word somebody, this is written. You can even go and read it today. An extermination order just to wipe out the whole entire nation. And this is against international law. And that's something that even the court ruled in our favor in the US that yes, Germany did violate the international law and they committed genocide.
And how does Germany argue that? It's in writing. How can they say no, this wasn't a genocide when it?
No, they can't, and they never argue against that. As much as they tried, they couldn't. We are not the first people demanding reparation or apology from German government. The precedents have been set by the German government himself. They apologized to the Polish government, they apologized to the to the Israeli government for the same crime. Why can they do the obvious thing with the Nama and Ovaherero people?
Now, is it correct that the German government is working with the Namibian government themselves in an effort to provide humanitarian aid, and that is their suggestion for atoning for the genocide? Is that correct? Is that the route they are trying to go down?
That's what they want to do, because they don't want to admit that you are paying reparation. Because what we say, how can you pay reparation without apologizing for the crimes you committed? But somehow since the Namibian government are desperate for funds, they try to reach an agreement with the German government so that they can get these funds, and do whatever they want to do with it. And I think I'm not the one to speak with a certainty, but there's kind of a pushback by the German government that the Nama and Ovaherero people leaders should be at the table in order for them to continue with this negotiation. We agreed to come to the table, but we have our own objectives. And somehow the Namibian government does not want us to demand anything. They just want us to come and sit down and just sign the document with their statements on without our input. And we totally refuse that. We don't want to allow ourselves to be used like that. And that's the reason why we filed the case, because we want to protect the interests of the Namibian or the interests of the Herero and Nama people, the real victims of the genocide.
Right. And for those who don't know, the Namibian government is primarily not representative of the Herero people.
Exactly. The Namibian government is dominated by Ovambo people, and they were not a victim of the genocide. And that's one thing that we have to, people have to know. And they don't want us to be part of this negotiation, because they know definitely if we do become part of the negotiation, the Nama and Ovaherero people, the real victim of the genocide, are going to benefit from it. And they don't want that. Right now, we have a situation where people have been resettled from the Ovambo land into their Nama and Ovaherero ancestral land. These people didn't lose their land. They still have their own ancestral land. The Nama and Ovaherero people and few other people are the one who lost their original ancestral land. But right now, those land are being sold to foreigners and be settled to Ovambo people, which is really unfair.
Right. So there's a continue. It sounds like there is a continuation.
Oh yeah.
the Namibian government continually selling off that land that had belonged to the Herero, just as had been done 100 years ago.
Exactly as it happened. This land had been confiscated by the Germans first, and then after the First World War by the South African government. And it's in the hand of the descendant of the Germans and the Boer, taken away from the original owners and be given to the descendant of the colonizers.
So what you and the Herero and Nama are looking for is essentially a formal apology, an acknowledgement of what had happened, and reparations akin to what the Jewish people had received after the Jewish Holocaust.
Exactly. The president had been set by the German government itself, and we want them to follow the same process as they did with the other people who were victims of the same crimes.
Right. And so it was a few years ago, it was in, I believe, January 2017, that you, the Ovaherero paramount chief and the Nama chief, brought the class action suit against Germany, essentially accusing the German state of genocide, of war crimes against both the Herero and the Nama people. So
yes,
what prompted you and the other plaintiffs to choose that time? Why 2017? Why not earlier?
Yes, that's a very good question, because by that time, there were rumors that the Namibian government and the German government were ready to sign an agreement. And we know, based on the advice from our lawyer, Ken McCullion, that if the two governments sign an agreement, we won't have any kind of case against the German government, because the agreement had been reached between the two legitimate governments. And that's why we pushed to file that case before the two governments reach an agreement.
Had to step in, because if the
yes.
government isn't fully representing you, and clearly the German government is not, whose voice is at the table? It didn't sound like you had a voice at the table.
No, we didn't. And we were deliberately excluded from that table. The filing of that case really derailed the whole negotiation process between the two governments, because the German government came to a realization that they can reach an agreement with the Namibian government while they have a case hanging over their head. And they realized that the real genuine representative of the Nama and Ovaherero people were not on the table. And we're not talking about just only the people in Namibia itself. We're talking about the people in Botswana and South Africa who were victims of the genocide. Who represent them? Not the Namibian government. The only legitimate representative of those people are Paramount Chief of Ovaherero, Bekwiri Koro, and the Nama leadership. And the German government knows and realizes that. That's why so far they are stalled to reach any agreement with the Namibian government. They know they don't represent all the Ovaherero and Nama people around the world.
Talk briefly just about the diaspora of the Herero people. The Herero originated from Namibia, and now you find Herero communities in Botswana and parts of South Africa. One
thing you had to realize is during the war, after the Ovaherero people were defeated at Hamakari, the Battle of Hamakari, they fled into Botswana. They would really fled and chase into the Kalahari Desert so that they can die from thirst and hunger. Thank God they eventually reached Botswana, and they went through to South Africa. And they have been settled there since when. And some people, the Herero people in Botswana, were able to maintain their culture and their language, and some of them lost it totally. And that happened the same thing in South Africa. In Botswana, at least the Herero people are part of the society. They are recognized as an ethnic group. But in South Africa, they are not recognized as a group, as an ethnic group, although they have been living there for more than 100 years.
That has to be very challenging in terms of identifying oneself and maintaining ties to your own community if you're not recognized.
Exactly, and that's so, you're totally correct. And thank God to our late Paramount Chief Koimariroko, who reached out to those people. And there is a connection now between those people, especially who were left behind in South Africa, and the people in Namibia. We now visiting each other, we are communicating, and we are making an effort, to establish that link. And hopefully maybe one day we raise enough funds to put like a school together where these people can learn about their culture and their language.
And Vera, if you were to be successful in the court case against the German government and were to receive reparations, would those funds be used to create schools where Herero can learn about their culture? What would the reparations be used for ideally?
No, no, look, one thing there's a kind of misconception what we are going to do with this reparation if we do succeed to get something from the German government. In terms of what we want to do in Namibia, way to benefit all the Namibians. Let's say with the Herero people decide to build a school in Okakarara. That school going to benefit all the Namibians who live in Okakarara, not just only school for the Ovaherero people. It's the same thing in the south. If the Namas decide to build a school in Keetmanshoop, that school going to benefit all the people in Keetmanshoop, regardless what kind of a race you are. Yes, it's going to benefit Ovaherero, especially in South Africa. Going to be allocated definitely to build schools where these Herero people are going to learn their culture, because so far they lost their culture. And would be the same thing in Botswana. But if any Tswana people want to attend those schools, they're not going to be, kicked out or kept out. They're going to be allowed, going to benefit all the people who are in that area. And one thing you have to understand is, if it was not for the confiscation of our land and the cattle during that time, the Ovaherero and Nama people would be very rich and economical, independent people. The poverty among the Ovaherero people, which we see today, is contributed to the confiscation of their wealth during that period. And that's what we are asking. We just get the land back so that people can settle, get some cattle, live their life the same way, the way they used to live their lives.
So it's about making whole what was taken from
exactly.
From
and that's what
Herero so many years ago, and about establishing a sense of identity for those that had to flee many years ago and establish communities in other countries like Botswana and South
exactly.
Africa. It's about community identity and restoration, really.
Exactly. And the most frustrating thing about the Namibian government is, even today, annually we have a commemoration about the genocide. And I don't remember that any top official Namibian government, even the president or the vice president, ever attended to one of those commemorations, either by the Namas or by the Hereros. And these are the people who claim to represent those people against the German government on the reparation negotiations. That makes sense to you?
It does sound a bit counterintuitive that they are claiming to represent you in negotiations, yet
exactly.
they show no interest.
Exactly.
In what they're representing.
Exactly. The only thing they're interested in is just the funds. The German government is starting to realize that all this economical assistance they have been giving to Namibia, they've been benefiting just only one group of people.
Ultimately, it's decided that New York will not hear the court case against Germany. What are the next steps? What are the next legal avenues that you foresee? Okay,
so right now we have few options that we have on the table that we consider. We maybe in the maybe a few weeks, we're going to make an announcement what the next step will be. But we have a few options on the table, especially here in the US, in Namibia, and internationally abroad. We have a few things that we are looking into to hold the German government accountable.
Okay. So it sounds like there's going to be some news in the coming weeks about what is going to happen with the court case and so forth. So we will stay tuned. Regarding education, so it seems like there's these two components that you and the Herero and Nama communities are using to attain justice. It's the legal avenue for formal apology and reparations, and then there's the education component.
And that education is very, very important. Sometimes you pick up a book and you read a book written about the history of the genocide, and you can see a lot of wrong spelling or even description of the wrong situation, what took place, and I think some books or some papers are written deliberately to mislead the people, because there are a lot of people who are still in denying that this genocide took place. Yes, still currently we have people who are deniers of our genocide, especially in Germany, and especially in Namibia itself. And that's kind of people we had to be aware of. And we can't let this kind of books or kind of these lectures or papers left unchallenged.
And how do you handle viewpoints like that are so far removed from reality? People that say this never happened.
Okay, let me tell you a story about something, what you call the inspiration. Or I remember one time I met this Jewish lady, a survivor of the Holocaust. And I asked her, how do you get the energy? How do you get to stand up in front of people telling about your story, knowing that there are people in that audience who are deniers of the Holocaust? And she looked at me and said, Veraa, the cause is bigger than me. This story needs to be told for the future generations. And that's the kind of attitude I really got from that woman. And this story need to be told. And people like that need to be challenged and need to be corrected.
So it's a matter of continually
educating
the world.
Exactly.
People that have misconceptions and advocating for your cause on a continual basis.
Oh no! Oh, definitely. This have to continue. This is a continual process. The younger generation of Ovaherero people and people like you around the world, they have to continue this because it's really amazing to me that today we are talking about a genocide that happened more than 100 years ago, and we have an organization like the United Nations that's supposed to prevent genocide, but unfortunately, it's a shame we still have genocide being committed today as we speak. But we have to continue.
So continue educating the world about what has happened.
Yes.
That we have the information, accurate information, and can one day wake up.
Exactly.
Globally.
Because what we are trying to do, especially in our case, is to educate the German government, the German people themselves. Because we believe if we educate the future generation, visually we're going to have a new leadership in position. But if this new leadership know or learn about the history, especially the German colonial history, which is still today is not part of the German school curriculum, I think we're seeing a light at the end of the tunnel.
All right, guys, that's it for today. I hope you liked this video. If you did, please give it a big thumbs up and subscribe at the link down below, and I will see you in the next video.